everybody, today for you guys I have a recent book wrap up. I have just a few books here that I want to share with you guys that I have read over about the past month, maybe month and a half. One took me a little bit longer to get through than I typically take to read a book, so it kind of halted me from reading as much as I usually like to read in a month, but my little stack is just back here, so I'm going to start picking them out and tell you guys what I think. So the first two books that I read were from the Throne of Glass series from Sarah J. Maas. The first one being Throne of Glass, and then the second one is Crown of Midnight. I am typically not a YA fantasy reader. If I read fantasy, typically I like to read adult fantasy, but I typically just don't read fantasy in general. I am very specific about the fantasy books that I like to read, and so I've just kind of been dabbling into YA fantasy more and more, and I must say that's actually a genre that for the past month and even currently is probably my favorite. I think I just never really read a lot of it, and now that I'm kind of getting more introduced to it, more exposed to it, I'm really starting to like it, and it's kind of like a whole new experience for me because there's really not a genre out there that I haven't read, and so this being kind of one of those, it's just been very interesting. And currently I'm just kind of on this little bit of a YA fantasy kick. So Throne of Glass follows the series protagonist, and her name is Selena Sardothian, and she actually is an assassin. She was captured and enslaved, but this opportunity arises where she can become free if she chooses to be the king of this realm's champion, which is basically like the king's assassin in a sense, which kind of puts her in this interesting position because how she feels about the current political system is not very highly. She is not a big fan of the king, his ideals, what he's been imposing on this realm, and she's been very against him and his power. And so it kind of puts her in this predicament where she can win her freedom by becoming an assassin for somebody that she doesn't like. So it's kind of got a very interesting premise to it, and in Throne of Glass we get to read about these different trials that she has to go through along with all of these other champions to see who at the end gets to win and gets to be the king's assassin. Meanwhile, Selena just faces a lot of personal issues and goes through a lot of stuff herself, and overall this really gripped me, and I absolutely love this storyline. Same with Crown of Midnight. This just kind of is a continuation of the story, so typical of sequels, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this because I don't want to spoil anything, but I am just so enthralled with this entire series. I did purchase the third novel, and I plan on reading it after what I'm currently reading, and I am just in love with Sarah J. Maas's writing style. I think it's really great, and just this realm that she's built. For me, it's easy to wrap my head around, but it's still very interesting and it's still very intriguing. I really enjoy the main character, and I like kind of the different love interests in the book, but I like how that's usually not at the very forefront of the story. It's nice that even though there is a little bit of a romance kind of entwined in it, there are so many other things going on that it just makes for a very interesting story. So like I said, I'm not usually a huge fan of this genre, but this completely pulled me in, and now I've been really enjoying it. The next novel I read is called Althea and Oliver, and this is by Christina Moracho. This is a story about a boy and a girl who have grown up next to each other their whole lives, and because of that they have become best friends, and they've always been best friends. And Oliver develops this syndrome, I think it starts with a K, I forget exactly what it's called, but basically he just falls to sleep for weeks on end, and meanwhile life is just passing by and he is just sleeping through it all. And Althea, who is the girl in this novel, she kind of starts to develop feelings for Oliver, but you kind of, when reading the story, really realize how different these characters are. And Althea is trying to juggle, being Oliver's friend and sort of having this friendship and this connection she's had her entire life while still finding her own identity and her own person. And Oliver is struggling with this as well. Meanwhile, he's battling this disease where he can just fall asleep at any point, and it can happen at very crucial points in his life, and he just literally sleeps for weeks and weeks and weeks. And there's just some different events that take place in this novel that are really building for both characters. There's different things that these characters go through that are just, really detrimental and are just, big events in their life, and so you kind of get to read about that. Overall, so the whole thing that this book is built on is this idea of identity, illness, love, and how one decision can change everything. I literally just read that off of the back, and I totally agree with those three things. The one decision though, if you guys read this book, or if you have read this book, I do not agree with whatsoever. I do not like the foundation that these characters are kind of built off of and sort of the turning point for these characters. I don't like what the author exactly made that out to be. It's an event that occurs that I am so strongly against, and I think when especially you decide to just look back on it, you just see really how, you know, it kind of gets pushed aside as this thing that, and I don't know if the author does this intentionally, but it almost kind of seems like it just kind of gets skirted over a little bit. Like, it still is a big deal, but it's not as big of a deal as it should be made. And overall, I found the characters for their age group, they're a little bit John Greeny in the sense that they are mature and speak and write way above what they should be at for like 16, 17-year-olds. And just the decisions and the stuff that they make, I found to be very unrelatable given their age. So that was kind of interesting. Overall, it's not a book that really stuck with me a whole lot. It's not a book that I really think about, and I just don't like the entire, like I said, the foundation and the premise of it. So it's not one that I would honestly recommend to you guys. It's good. It's definitely not like an awful book. It's written beautifully and it's paced very well. The character development is fantastic, but what these characters are developed off of, I just don't agree with. And you guys can read about it online, or like I said, read it yourself, but I don't know. It's just, it's not the best. Similar, kind of in the YA contemporary genre, I have More Happy Than Not, and this is by Adam Silvera. This is amazing. If you're in the mood for a young adult contemporary, skip Althea and Oliver and go straight to this. This is a story about a boy who has a family tragedy, and it just obviously really has deeply affected him and everything that he does in his life. And within this time period, it's not set in the future or anything like that, but the author has added in the idea that there is this new procedure that can erase memories. And so it's just kind of about a struggle and tragedy and getting over that emotionally. But in this character's situation, with the ability to literally have these memories medically erased from his mind, he just kind of starts to think about that idea, and the whole story just kind of unravels from there. And it is absolutely amazing. It is such a good book. I absolutely love the main character, and I love all of the other characters as well. But just how the story unravels and the different turns and twists and everything that happens within the story, it is so gripping. It's so emotional. It is sad at points. It's happy. It's funny. It's just kind of all over the place. It's really what a good YA contemporary novel should be. It's just, for me, kind of put up on that list of books like Eleanor and Park and I'll Give You the Sun, and just some of these books that have just stuck with me and will always stick with me, that are just such good coming of age slash, you know, real stuff that people and young people have to deal with. It's just such a good read, and I would highly recommend it to you guys. And then very finally, I have, that was very fancy, Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Thorns and Roses. Obviously, I'm on a little bit of a Sarah J. Maas kick right now, if you guys can't tell, but after reading Throne of Glass and seeing how amazing that was, when I knew that she had another series out, I was like, okay, well, I have to start reading that one as well. So right now, I'm kind of in the middle of this series, and I'm juggling a Throne of Glass, so that's been interesting. But this is still a YA fantasy novel. It's about a girl named Feyre, and she lives in this realm where the world is divided into fairy lands and then mortal lands, and she is a mortal and lives in the mortal lands. And it's kind of a Beauty and the Beast slash fairy tale spin-off. There's tons of elements in it that are very Beauty and the Beasty, and I think that was the main inspiration for this book. But throughout the novel, you'll find tons of different, you know, fairy tale inspirations, and that's just one thing I really like about this book, is I love a good, not necessarily retelling story. Like, I don't really enjoy, you know, reading or listening to the Cinderella story a million times or the Beauty and the Beast story a million times, but when there's certain elements that are pulled from those but then it's changed and morphed to kind of be its own, I have a high appreciation for that, because of course in my heart I absolutely love these stories so much, but I just like it when it's a little bit different, and that's exactly what this is. So because of a decision that Feyre makes, she ends up having to go to the fairy realms to kind of live out her punishment with this guy named Tamlin, who kind of represents our beast figure. And as she starts to live with Tamlin, you know, of course her initial feelings are very aggressive and very negative, but then they kind of start to turn around as she gets to see what this world is like, because really in this realm the fairies and the mortals really just kind of hate each other, and there's a lot of negativity between it, and there is like like a literal wall between the realms, and overall it's just very negative feelings both ways. But she kind of gets to embrace the fairy culture and sort of see what exactly it has to offer. And meanwhile, there's sort of this presence in the fairy realm that is growing, that Feyre starts to notice is really taking a toll on Tamlin and on this entire realm, and it has the potential to affect her own family. And so she kind of is struggling with this as well, this actual power that's taking over. Meanwhile, she's struggling with being away from her family, being in this total unknown realm, really at first being super upset and angry at her situation and at Tamlin, and then it just sort of grows from there, you know, again, kind of Beauty and the Beast style, but there's so much more morphed into it that I just think is so awesome. And I'm not gonna lie, this was actually the book that took me a while to get through, because for the first half I was kind of, you know, it follows a lot of the same things that we've seen a lot, and it really wasn't until the second half of the book that I was like, okay, this is different, and I started to really get into it. There's just different stuff that takes place at the end of the book that is so gripping, and as soon as I finished this, I went out the next day and I bought the sequel because I was just so obsessed with the story at that point. And I'm currently just in a Court of Thorns and Roses phase. I'm just loving it. I'm currently reading A Court of Mist and Fury, which is the second one, and I'm absolutely adoring it. And now I'm just totally into the series. Between this and Throne of Glass had a way of drawing me in from the beginning that this didn't, but overall I immensely enjoy both series a lot. I think that the protagonist from Throne of Glass I enjoy a little bit more than Feyre. Feyre I find to be sort of contradicting every once in a while. She's just sort of one of those characters that can't really seem to make up her mind, which me being a very decisive person, I just don't relate to, but it's still a very, very, very good read. And I immensely enjoy the storyline and the realm and a lot of the different characters within this series. So again, if you want a good YA fantasy recommendation, this is a good one. And that is all that I have to share with you guys today. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. I love doing these kinds of videos for you guys. They're actually some of my favorites. So if you guys have any book recommendations, please leave them down below. I get the best book recommendations from you guys. So I very, very, very much so enjoy that. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.